President Trump finds himself caught in a pivotal legal confrontation as a federal judge demands the truth under penalty of perjury, directly challenging his narrative of a decisive military victory in Venezuela.
Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro has his first day in U.S. federal court and proclaiming his innocence.
This is, of course, following his dramatic arrest over the weekend and his country's future hanging in the balance. Doug Lazater has been tracking all of this from Washington this morning, has more on what's happening now and how a lot of lawmakers are responding. Good morning, Doug.
Good morning. The operation to arrest Maduro continues to divide Washington, even as lawmakers learn more in a classified briefing on how the administration.
This scenario stands as a quintessential example of how the president's operational successes frequently transform into complex legal entanglements. The timeline reveals that on January 5th, merely 48 hours after a military raid captured Nicolas Maduro, he was arraigned before Judge Allison Nathan in a New York federal court. The judge's central order mandated that Maduro return to court to provide sworn testimony regarding the narco-terrorism, cocaine smuggling, and cartel connection allegations central to the prosecution's case. His use of that term is analytically significant. It is not the language of unambiguous triumph, but of a protracted, difficult ordeal. This lexical choice suggests a presidential recognition of the legal complexities now unfolding. A marked shift from the rhetoric of a clean military victory. The significance of this moment is profoundly amplified by the specific judge assigned to the case. Judge Allison Nathan is not a randomly selected jurist without prior experience in matters involving the president. Specifically, she presided over the New York hush money case where she rejected the contention that a payment constituted an official act of the presidency, defining it instead as a personal transaction. Her oversight now extends to the Maduro prosecution, meaning she will adjudicate the admissibility of evidence collected during the raid and rule on what may be presented in court. The president must logically recognize that this judge has demonstrated a commitment to legal statute over political deference or creative legal theory. Simultaneously, Maduro's defense counsel is initiating a series of motions challenging the fundamental legality of the military operation that captured him. These challenges question whether the raid violated the War Powers Act, whether Maduro's constitutional rights were infringed upon during his capture, and whether any evidence seized can be lawfully admitted in a U.S.
court. Each of these foundational challenges will be heard by Judge Nathan.
Should she rule against the government, determining the raid was illegal or the evidence inadmissible, the entire prosecution could collapse. A tactical military victory would thereby convert into a comprehensive legal catastrophe. This is precisely the type of constitutional quandary the judiciary is designed to carefully manage. The substantive gravity of the charges themselves heightens these procedural stakes. Maduro faces the potential of a life sentence if convicted. Attorney General Pamela Bondi has publicly outlined a case involving vast quantities of cocaine and alleged connections to terrorist organizations like Hezbollah, portraying Maduro as leading an international criminal enterprise.
However, if the underlying raid is deemed illegal or unconstitutional, these substantive allegations become procedurally moot.
Inadmissible evidence cannot form the basis of a conviction. The administration would then be left in an untenable position. A defendant allegedly captured through illegal means, evidence collected unconstitutionally, and a prosecution built upon a legally compromised foundation. This constitutes an unviable case, a profound legal entanglement. This situation reflects a discernible pattern observed in recent presidential actions. The dramatic, initially applauded move is swiftly followed by the emergence of serious legal complications, ultimately placing the president in a more precarious position than before he acted. Presently, he contends with congressional pushback concerning war powers, the potential for impeachment inquiries should Congress determine the War Powers Act was violated, scrutiny from the Supreme Court on the raid's constitutionality, and now supervision from a judge with a documented history of rejecting his legal positions. Thus, a military success on January 3rd had evolved into a significant legal dilemma by January 5th, demonstrating the velocity at which political narratives can unravel under legal scrutiny. This rapid shift also implies a potential miscalculation. The president may have anticipated a different sequence: the capture, a public display of strength, and a swift transition to other matters. He likely did not anticipate such immediate, rigorous judicial questioning of the operation's legality or concurrent congressional votes on war powers resolutions. Yet, this is the current reality, a confrontation with the consequences of his own actions and the legal principle that the presidency is not exempt from constitutional adherence.
This principle is enforced by a judge who does not acquiesce to executive pressure.
Therefore, an examination of Judge Allison Nathan's background clarifies why her involvement is particularly consequential for the Trump administration. Her judicial track record with the president is established and unfavorable from his perspective. As the judge in the New York hush money case, she evaluated arguments that payments were official acts and rejected them unequivocally, stating they were personal and not protected by official immunity. That prior ruling means she now oversees the Maduro prosecution, making critical decisions on evidence admissibility and the very feasibility of moving forward. This history likely instills considerable concern within the administration, as it understands her predisposition to scrutinize its legal arguments without special allowance for presidential status. Consequently, when defense lawyers file motions contesting the raid's legality, arguing War Powers Act violations or unconstitutional evidence seizure, they argue before a judge already proven willing to rule against the president. This creates a precarious legal position where the administration's core strategy is inherently vulnerable before the proceedings truly begin. Analyzing the January 5th arraignment in detail provides further context. Maduro was formally charged with drug trafficking and narco-terrorism offenses carrying life imprisonment. Attorney General Bondi presented the government's case alleging a multi-billion-dollar smuggling operation with terrorist links. However, the unspoken central issue was the legal status of the military raid itself. Even as the prosecution laid out its substantive claims, defense lawyers were filing motions challenging the operation's foundational legality. This judicial command compels him to address the charges and the circumstances of his capture in detail. This order is strategically disadvantageous for the administration. Maduro's testimony, coupled with cross-examination by his counsel, will unfold before Judge Nathan. She will be observing not just the content of the testimony, but evaluating the legitimacy of the government's entire posture, the admissibility of its evidence, and the legality of the capture operation. A judicial finding that the raid was illegal possesses the destructive capacity to invalidate the entire prosecution. Behind the scenes, they are filing a habeas corpus petition, a fundamental challenge to the lawfulness of Maduro's detention. They contend his capture during an allegedly illegal military raid violated his constitutional rights, warranting his release. Additionally, they are filing motions to suppress all evidence obtained during the raid, alongside broader constitutional challenges to the prosecution. All these motions will be heard by Judge Nathan. This grants the defense a tangible possibility of having evidence ruled inadmissible or even achieving their client's release based on constitutional violations. Consider the implications of such outcomes for the president. The entire Venezuela military operation, publicly celebrated on January 3rd, could be declared illegal by a federal court. The seized evidence could be ruled unusable. The captured defendant could be ordered released. The prosecution could disintegrate. This would occur in full public view before Congress and the international community. It would constitute a catastrophic political and legal failure, demonstrating that a federal judge has publicly declared a presidential-ordered raid illegal and in violation of the Constitution. It would serve as a potent rebuttal to any perception of unchecked executive power. This case also intersects with a broader contemporaneous political conflict. The Maduro prosecution is unfolding as Congress actively pushes back against presidential military authority, voting on measures to override vetoes and advancing a bipartisan war powers resolution to curtail such operations. In this climate, a federal judge is preparing to rule on whether the president's most recent military action violated the War Powers Act. Congress will monitor this judicial ruling closely. A finding against the administration would substantiate congressional concerns about executive overreach, provide concrete evidence for impeachment debates, and illustrate a pattern of disregarding war powers constraints. The specific content of Maduro's forthcoming testimony introduces another layer of risk. Under oath and subject to cross-examination, operational details will inevitably emerge. Planning methodologies, intelligence foundations, adherence to procedural channels, and the degree of operational forethought. All this testimony becomes part of the formal record before Judge Nathan. If it reveals reckless execution, disregarded protocols, or ignored legal warnings about War Powers Act compliance, it furnishes the judge with a factual basis to rule the raid unconstitutional and to suppress evidence. President Trump, acknowledging this grim prospect, has already framed it as a slog, a long, painful process where he lacks control, faces an unsympathetic judge, and watches a prosecution he initiated descend into serious legal jeopardy. His military victory is transmuting into a real-time legal nightmare precisely because the judiciary prioritizes constitutional and statutory law over perceived presidential power. She is a federal judge with a demonstrated record of ruling against powerful individuals, including President Trump, whose creative legal arguments she has previously rejected. When defense arguments land before her, they are evaluated by a jurist with a proven disposition to rule against the president's legal stance. The testimony order itself is a procedural mechanism with substantive consequences. Sworn testimony and cross-examination will allow defense lawyers to challenge the government's evidence, highlight inconsistencies, and underscore questions about the capture's legality directly to the presiding judge. Judge Nathan will be listening intently, assessing the case's legitimacy and the admissibility of raid-seized evidence. A decision to exclude that evidence due to an illegal seizure would eviscerate the government's case. The habeas corpus petition represents the most existential threat. By arguing Maduro is detained illegally due to constitutional rights violations during an unlawful raid, the defense seeks his release. A judicial agreement with this argument would be devastating, constituting a formal declaration that the president ordered an illegal military operation. It would affirm the existence of enforceable legal limits on presidential power. Furthermore, Maduro's testimony will generate a public information repository. Details about planning, execution, and potential legal warnings will enter the media ecosystem and become available to Congress. This provides legislators with concrete evidence to assess War Powers Act compliance and potentially bolster impeachment efforts. Given the current congressional appetite to restrict military authority, any evidence of legal violation will be employed aggressively. Contemplating a potential ruling against the raid's legality is therefore essential. If Judge Nathan rules it violated the War Powers Act and the Constitution, she may suppress evidence, deem the capture illegal, and order Maduro's release. This sequence would cause the prosecution to collapse, forcing the administration to release the defendant and drop charges. The celebrated military victory would be judicially invalidated, compelling the president to publicly explain an illegal, unconstitutional operation.
This judicial finding would directly reinforce concurrent congressional actions to override vetoes and pass war powers resolutions, vindicating the legislative branch's concerns and providing it with powerful ammunition to further restrict executive authority.
The president would thus be besieged on dual fronts, judicial and legislative. The immediate next steps are procedurally defined. Maduro will testify by January 12th under oath. His lawyers will cross-examine the government's presentation and raise constitutional challenges. Judge Nathan will adjudicate these matters, deciding on evidence admissibility and the raid's constitutionality. Her rulings will determine the prosecution's fate. Either it moves forward toward trial or it disintegrates. Regardless, a significant volume of information about the raid will become public, exposing presidential decision-making to detailed scrutiny. The overarching analysis reveals a clear narrative. The president perceived a decisive military victory, but has instead engineered a multidimensional legal crisis. His military operation is under intense judicial review, his conduct is questioned by Congress, and his decisions are challenged by constitutional scholars. This stems from a pattern of unilateral action that bypasses congressional oversight and legal process, triggering institutional pushback from co-equal branches. The president now faces the prospect of his operation being declared illegal, his prosecution dismissed, his evidence excluded, and his defendant released, all while Congress moves to further limit his powers. He is under concerted attack from multiple institutions, and his legal strategy, predicated on expansive executive authority, is being rejected by judges and legislators alike. The foreseeable future likely holds further legal defeats and congressional resistance. President Trump is confronting the foundational reality that the presidency is bound by the Constitution, requires congressional approval for sustained military operations, and cannot simply act on unilateral impulse.
This is the sobering reality for an administration that perceived its authority in more absolute terms.
The federal judge's order for sworn testimony directly challenges President Trump's narrative of a clean military victory in Venezuela.
The presiding judge has a prior record of rejecting Trump's legal arguments, raising the risk she may rule the capture operation.
Such a ruling could suppress all evidence and collapse the prosecution. This legal battle coincides with congressional efforts to constrain presidential war powers through new resolutions. The situation exemplifies a pattern where unilateral executive action triggers institutional pushback, creating compounded legal and political vulnerabilities.